Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right. If you can't hear me at any point, just wave your hand or yell or do something, and I'll try to speak up. I've never been accused of being quiet, so you shouldn't have too much problems here in hearing me. First of all, let me say thank you to the Republican women who invited me here to speak on this topic.
Just keep talking, and eventually I'll figure out where it goes.
Okay. The topic of human trafficking, especially as it relates to children, is a topic that is near and dear to me. I have been a prosecutor since I graduated from law school in 2002, and I have spent most of my career prosecuting crimes against women and children. That has ranged from all kinds of crimes, from sex crimes to physical abuse. Is that good now? I almost feel like it. Okay, it didn't go off. I touched it again. I have spent my entire career, and honestly, my passion has always been in helping women and children who have been abused. I don't think it's working anymore, but I'll just speak loud.
Shannon, and then see if taking it further away from you helps.
That'll probably help.
Closer will help.
No, from the mic, closer.
Shannon, pull the
Okay.
mic up to your mouth.
Flash is speaking. There you go.
Do you have it on now?
I have it on.
All right.
Right here. My break is coming soon.
Okay. With respect to the PowerPoint that's up in front of you, deals specifically with commercial sexual exploitation of children. This is a specific type of human trafficking. It's one, again, that is near and dear to my heart, so I'll spend most of the presentation talking about commercial sexual exploitation of children. But with respect to the general topic of human trafficking, you can best describe human trafficking as simply modern-day slavery. Trafficking is the exploitation of men, women, and children who are forced to work or to have sex against their will through the use of violence, deception, or coercion. It's one of the most pressing human rights issues that we have today facing us. When you hear the term human trafficking, most people, especially most people that I talk to in Cherokee County, think, oh, this is not something that really affects us here in Cherokee County. This is a problem that happens in other countries. Or this is a problem that happens in other states. Some people may even think, yeah, this may be a problem that happens in Metro Atlanta, but it really doesn't affect me and it really doesn't affect my children. All of those are extremely wrong. We here in Cherokee County have prosecuted human trafficking cases. As recently as today, we had a plea in one of our cases that stemmed from an incident that occurred in Canton. This is something that we will be dealing with, each and every one of us, whether it's people you know, your children, your grandchildren, everyone that has access to the internet are affected in some way or can be. So because of that, it's an issue that needs to be discussed. It's an issue that people need to really look at carefully and take precautions. I have two small children. I say that, and they're really not small anymore. I have a 15-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son, both of which are way more tech savvy and were at the age of 3 than I am today. They can find anything they want to find in about 2.5 seconds on their cell phone, their tablet, their computers. As most of you know, well, my children, and one goes to Etowah and one goes to Booth, they have issued laptops from the school. Those laptops travel around with them from class to class every day and have since they were in elementary school. I know we have lots of school board people, and I don't know that I need to be saying this out loud. My child will probably kill me, but I was going through her cell phone, as I regularly do, and all of her pictures come to my cell phone. So I will routinely look at those pictures, and I saw a picture of her in school. They have their learning device forums where she actually uses her phone to read books in class. I mean, she uses it virtually for everything, to the point where when she gets grounded, she tries to use that card of, I have to have it for school because I can't get through the day without doing my work on my cell phone. In any event, I was looking through her phone and or through the pictures that she had taken, and I saw a picture of a computer screen that happened to be an Instagram post. Well, in looking at it and looking at the timestamp, I noticed it was during the day, during school. I know that the computers are disabled at school to the point where you're not supposed to get on certain websites, Instagram, Facebook, social media being those sites. So when I looked at it, I asked her, what is this a picture of, Kylie? She's like, oh, that's my friend looking at some, I don't even remember what the post was on Instagram, but it was something that didn't really spark my attention. What caught my attention was that it was in the middle of the day on a school computer. So I asked her, like, I thought you had firewalls. I thought that you were prevented from going on these sites. And she looked at me, as most teenagers do, kind of rolled her eyes and said, yeah, right. Nobody can prevent you from looking at social media sites. I was like, okay, note to self. Need to have a conversation with somebody at the school. These kids have it figured out how to get around firewalls, how to do whatever it is they want to do on school computers, on any type of computer, on any type of device. So I say that in that even if you do not allow your child or your grandchildren don't have access to a cell phone, they still have access to social media. They still have access to sites that they can be targeted for sexual exploitation and for harmful things. So because of that, it is extremely important that we all are really hypervigilant. My kids accuse me of being hypervigilant in about every aspect. I've been doing this job for a long time. I've seen a lot of bad things, and because of that, I probably am considered to be hypervigilant when it comes to looking at everything that my kids do on social media and being that mom. And I don't apologize for that. I tell my children until they are no longer in my house, and as long as I pay for the device, it is not their property, it is my property, and I will by all means look at what's on there. And if they don't want me to do it, then they shouldn't be doing anything on there that they should be upset about me seeing. I mean, if they are, they need to stop. But you hear stories that for parents and for grandparents are horror stories about kids being targeted on very innocent mediums. My son, my 12-year-old, loves playing Fortnite. He's a little out of it now. He plays too many sports to stay and play videos, which is great. That's the point in keeping him in sports. But it was recently that I heard about individuals targeting kids through Fortnite and talking to them and trying to lure them into meeting and talking and sending pictures and doing all things inappropriate, and that horrifies you as a parent. But the point is we need to know. We need to know that it exists, that it occurs out there, and to do what we need to do with talking to our kids, with monitoring, with following up, and making sure that we as parents and grandparents are doing everything we can to prevent that. That's just a little bit of my soapbox, I guess, for a lack of a better term, as to why it is that this topic should be important to each and every one of you. With respect to human trafficking, again, I'm going to focus mostly on sexual servitude with children. I could probably spend 5 hours talking about the topic of human trafficking. Because I think I have about 45 minutes, we're going to narrow it down and again talk about a specific type of human trafficking of particular interest to me. Okay, commercial sexual exploitation of children. It's also called domestic minor sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, human trafficking, or child prostitution. Simply put, It's paid sexual abuse of a child. This is a video, hopefully it works. And again, it's one of those things that when you watch it and you hear what this child's saying, you get that nauseous feeling in your stomach. That's why I hate that you guys are having to listen to this while you're eating, but okay.
You know, you're 12 years old and you're living with your moms, and your mom's is struggling because she didn't think that life was really going to work out like this for her, and she doesn't have a man around and the all around her that has been that great. Sexual abuse has become a kind of normal thing. You think that other people don't have secrets that are as bad as you, when you try to talk to somebody at school and they haven't really encouraged you, maybe they just haven't had time to listen to you. And so you're seeing these girls on the videos, and they're so pretty and they're so sexy. And so your way at 12 of escaping into the fantasy world is to think about what it must be like to be one of these girls. And you know that adult men already look at you. And you wonder how you can kind of use that.
It's just a child. That's how it's supposed to be. Like a child, like an adult.
So one day you're coming out of school and there's a guy outside in a Cadillac, and he's nice looking. I mean, he's got the baseball cap and the jeans and the Timbs, and he tells you how pretty you are and you know how pretty your hair looks. And it's been a while since anybody even really noticed anything about you. And for the first time, you feel like somebody's really interested in you, because now all of a sudden he's asking you about your dreams and your hopes and where your father's at, and he says that he can be a daddy to you.
The people that I shouldn't have depended on for support.
And so that night he takes you to a club and he puts you up on the stage and he gives you a few drinks, and there's men throwing dollars at you, and it's scary, but all the time you're just looking at his face in the back of the room, and he's like, you know, go ahead baby girl, go ahead, you're doing it for daddy. And you're feeling proud because nobody's ever said that to you. And so then that night he tells you that there's more stuff that you've got to do, and he takes you into a room and there's a man there and he tells you to strip, and you think this is something you'll never do, and yet there's a part of you that already knew how to do this, because that's what your stepfather's been doing to you all these years before. And so you turn that trick, and it's like a part of you has died inside. And so you come out of the club that night and you get in the car, and you know he's pumping 50 cents, and he takes you to McDonald's and he tells you, you did a good job tonight, sweetie. And he's stuffing his pockets with the $1,000 that you made. And right now, you're happy.
The people that I shouldn't have depended on, that I was dependent on for support.
Feel like this is the best that it's ever going to get, and everything else in your life has prepared you for this moment. All the sexual abuse, all the neglect, all the drama, all the pain, all the trauma has prepared you for tonight, where you stepped across a line that you always thought you'd never really quite step across. And you don't realize that night what it'll be like to be on the track and get raped. And you don't realize that daddy isn't really going to protect you. You don't realize what it's like to have a gun held to your head that night. You don't realize what it's going to be like when you catch your first STD. You don't realize what it's going to be like when you first come home and daddy beats you for the first time because you didn't make enough money. You don't know what it's going to be like to have cops offer to trade sex with you in exchange for not being arrested. And then sometimes you do that and they'll still lock you up anyway. You don't know what it's like to sit up in jail and know that you just made $1,500 for your pimp last night, but he won't come down and put $200 bail on just to get you out a few days early. You don't know what it's like to walk down the street at 6 o'clock in the morning when you're just getting off work and people are starting their day and they see you and they know what you do and they look look at you in a way that you just don't feel like you belong in that world anymore. And you don't know what it's like to feel like you've lost part of yourself along the way, and to feel like you'll never leave. And no matter how many times you try to leave, he'll always find you and catch you. But that night, all you care about is the fact you're riding in a Cadillac, and you eat on McDonald's, and you're listening to 50, and you've got this one man that you really think loves you sitting right by your side.
This was a video called The Making of a Girl.
The makings of what?
The Making of a Girl. That was the name of the video. And that was a victim of sex trafficking that's telling her story and telling how it all started off for her. Just to give you a little, you saw some statistics in that video, and to give you some statistics that I got from the National Human Trafficking Hotline. In the United States, nearly 32,000 cases of human trafficking have been reported to this hotline in the last 10 years. In Georgia alone, since 2007, there have been 4,630 calls on this hotline, 1,445 cases of human trafficking reported to the hotline. As of June the 20th of 2018, there have been 298 calls and 157 cases of human trafficking in Georgia. And this is reported to a hotline, reported by victims themselves, family members of victims, people in the community. Of these statistics, the number one reporter of those 298 calls were community members, people who just recognized signs of a child or a person being trafficked and reached out to this hotline. The reason I tell you that is, if these are people who are calling a hotline, can you imagine the actual number? Much more than 298. Of those 298 cases in 2018, or the first 6 months of 2018, 108 were regarding sex trafficking, 33 were labor trafficking, 10 were labor and sex trafficking, and 6 were not specified. Of just the sex trafficking cases, of the 157 cases, 125 victims were female, 31 were male, and 1 was unspecified. 93 of the victims were adults, and 45 were children. Again, of those callers, 72 were community members, 65 were actual victims, and 28 were family members of the victim. With respect to sex trafficking, the venues, the top 5 venues that were reported on this hotline were hotel, motel-based, commercial front brothels, online ads where the venue is unknown, and residential brothels and street-based. Again, those statistics were really just to give you a glimpse of, if these are people calling into a hotline, how pervasive the problem actually is that are not reported. In Georgia, we have a statute that is codified in OCGA 16546 that makes it a criminal offense to traffic a human for either labor servitude or for sexual servitude. The statute is really long. It's about 3 pages. It gives all the definitions of what is coercion, what is deception, and this has been a work in progress. It is something that our legislators are still tweaking, and there's a bill even before the legislature right now that will strengthen the laws against human trafficking. The punishments for human trafficking have changed dramatically over the years, and today trafficking for labor servitude is 10 years as a mandatory minimum, 20 years as a maximum in prison, and the fine of $100,000 if the victim is 18 years of age or older. If the victim is under 18 and coercion or deception is used, Or if the victim has developmental disabilities, the minimum sentence is 25 years in prison and the maximum sentence is 50 years and a $100,000 fine. And that's with respect to labor servitude. With respect to trafficking for sexual servitude, if the individual is what we'll talk about in a little bit as being a pimp, or if it is, even if you are a buyer, and the victim is 18 years or older, the minimum sentence is 10 years in prison, the maximum sentence is 20 years in prison. If the victim is 18 and coercion and deception are used, or if the victim has developmental disabilities, the minimum sentence is 25 years and the maximum sentence is 50 years in prison. If subsection 3 of this code section with respect to individuals who are helping to facilitate the trafficking of these individuals, if the victim is 16 years or older, then the sentence is 5 to 20 in prison, and if the victim is 16 or under or has a developmental disability, this sentence for that particular violation is 10 to 20. This can be used not just to prosecute the individual who's facilitating the actual purchasing of these females, what we call commonly known as the pimp. You can actually prosecute individuals who help facilitate via transportation the acts. So we actually have the case here in Cherokee County where a taxi driver was prosecuted. Now, don't worry, it's not somebody who didn't have any idea what was going on. This was a specific taxi driver who was employed by this group to do nothing but pick up the females that were being trafficked and transport men to and from the house in order to buy sex with these individuals. Those are all prison cases with mandatory minimum sentences. This is something that has, again, been a work in progress for the Georgia legislature, and they continue to strengthen the crimes with respect to individuals who are trafficking both adults and children. With respect to children, you can charge these offenses, and you would normally charge them, but you would also fall back and charge all of the sex abuse cases against children, child molestation, aggravated child molestation, all of which in Georgia have a mandatory minimum of 25 years in prison, and actually it's a life sentence with a mandatory minimum of 25 years to be served. So there are a lot of other crimes that you would look at charging potentially individuals who are trafficking people, especially with respect to children. So the victim. One of the problems that we have when it comes to prosecuting cases is misconceptions that exist with respect to not just the crime but also the victims. Each and every one of you sitting in here, if you live in Cherokee County, can be jurors in Cherokee County. If you don't live in Cherokee County, you could potentially be a juror wherever you do live. And since you can be a juror, one of the things main reasons that I like talking to individuals is to educate. And to educate each and every one of you who is a potential juror here in Cherokee County or wherever you may live as to things such as this, common misconceptions. Here are things that routinely you may hear with respect to these types of cases, the CSEC cases, that victims choose to get involved in the life. Why should I care? This is a choice they made, whether they're an adult or a child. This is something they're choosing to do. The victims always know they're going to be selling their bodies when they first get involved. That the life is a glamorous life, like it's portrayed on Hollywood movies. Pretty Woman. The life is an easy way for a child or for an adult to gain wealth and independence. Or if the child was truly a victim, she would, or he would, quote unquote, act like one. And finally, that prostitution is a victimless crime. These are all myths, and looking at not just the other resources that you have, but listening to videos like you just listened to help explain why each and every one of these statements are misconceptions. I like numbers and statistics and making sure that you have information to base it on other than just feelings. So, giving you some numbers. In the United States, at least 100,000 to 300,000 youth are at risk for commercial sexual exploitation annually in the United States. Typically, when you're looking at children, what the number one factor is that you see someone is likely going to end up in this particular life is if the child runs away. Once they run away from home, and within 48 hours, the statistics show that they will end up having basically to have sex with an individual in order to live. Whether it's to get food, whether it's to get shelter, whether it's to get anything to move on and live without having an adult, a parent, or guardian to take care of them, they're basically forced to do what they have to do in order to survive. And for most of these kids, the very first thing that happens is they meet someone that promises them a lifestyle that they've never lived. It's not atypical, and in fact, I believe you saw one of the statistics that we put up there that I believe it said 80% of victims of commercial sexual exploitation at some point in time have been victims of sexual abuse. This is not uncommon for adults that are prostitutes, in that at some point in time, most of them were sexually abused. 1.7 million children run away each year in the United States. 1 in 3 teens will become a victim of CSEC within the first 48 hours of leaving home and becoming homeless. This one is the one that horrifies me, having both a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old. The average age of entry into the commercial sex industry in the United States is 12 to 14. I look at the faces of my kids and see how immature they are at the ages of 12 and 15, and even though my daughter physically looks like an adult, and for at least the people around here who know her, you would never look at her and say she looks like she's 15. However, if you talk to her, even though I think she's a genius, it is clear that socially and her maturity level is nowhere near where it needs to be to live on the streets and to be forced with how you're going to eat your next meal, where you're going to sleep, what you're going to do. And for that reason, a lot of these children turn to this particular lifestyle in order to survive. Risk factors for CSEC victims, lack of adult supervision and support. Again, it's of no surprise that most of the children that enter into and become victims of commercial sexual exploitation don't have a good support system at home. They don't have a parent or a guardian who is even concerned about them. Sometimes it may be that the parent's doing the best they can and they're working several jobs, but they're leaving their children home alone or to fend for themselves, or not really paying much attention as to what's going on and who they're talking to and who is talking to them and reaching out to them by social media. Other risk factors that we see, sexual or physical abuse at home by a family member or a friend, history with the Department of Family and Children Services, parental substance abuse by the children, domestic violence within the home. All of these are significant risk factors for children to become victims. Common indicators of victims, again, especially with our educators in the room, things that can be looked at from a perspective of a teacher or anybody that deals with children. When the child's run away from home 3 or more times within the last 12 months, inappropriate dress, including oversized clothing, presents or gifts, having items that are not typical of someone who does not have a job, unexplained injuries on the child. One of the things, and it's a little hard to see on this TV, but the picture here, the child in that picture has a tattoo on her neck. That's what we call branding, and a lot of times the pimps will brand the child. They will put a tattoo on them that marks them as their property. It may have their name, it may have their symbol, it may have whatever it is that that particular individual uses, but you would see it on all of his girls. So sellers. What are sellers typically known as? I think for the most part, people, when they hear the word pimp, they understand that that's a seller. We like, in the business that I'm in, we like to use trafficker, words that have not been commonly seen in our society as even being remotely good. When you think of the word pimp, you think of people dressing up on Halloween, and it having to some extent a good connotation about that word. Really, what this is somebody who is coercing another human into selling their body. Common myths with respect to individuals who are sellers. First of all, it is a myth that all traffickers are men. We do see female traffickers, however, that is unusual. It is not true to say that all traffickers are men. That traffickers are easily identifiable, that they wear certain material or certain clothing that you can look at them and say, yep, that's a pimp. We ask that question a lot during jury selection, even with just a child molester. Is there anybody here who thinks they know what a child molester looks like? It's no different when you're dealing with a human trafficker. There is absolutely no way just to look at somebody and tell that they are someone who abuses children. There's no way to look at someone and tell that they are forcing individuals into modern day slavery. That traffickers are only in the metro area. That's untrue as well. Traffickers only find their victims on the streets. Again, the number one way these days that traffickers actually find their victims is with the internet and with social media. That all traffickers use force and violence to take victims. I think, again, as a parent, you like to think that your child would never give their information out over the internet, would never give their name, would never send a picture, would never do anything because they know the dangers that are associated with strangers taking them. That's not where we see the majority of traffickers coming into play with children. They actually start off and lure them. They find out whatever it is that child's weakness and vulnerability is, which sometimes is really just attention. If you have a child that doesn't get much attention at home, either their parents are not there or they don't have parents, it's not very hard to imagine how that child would react or feel if you had an adult that came and picked them up in a Cadillac and took them to get their fingernails done and spent time with them and spent money on them. And that's a lot of times how these traffickers will start. They will try to show these children, these individuals, that they're good, and this lifestyle is good, and all you have to do is to come with me and be with me, and you're going to live the high life. And quickly, that turns into the individuals being harmed, being beaten, being forced to do acts they never thought in a million years that they would participate in. And at that point, it's too late. There is no help. There is no way to get out. There is no way to escape. Because, again, the common myth being that you can just simply walk away is very untrue. For most of the victims that are victimized with respect to human trafficking, they are not allowed to leave. If they do leave, they're found, and a lot of times they're beaten, and sometimes they're even killed. We had, up until a couple of years ago, a home here in Cherokee County that the individual who ran the home, the whole purpose of the home was to take in victims of commercial sexual exploitation that were children. When I actually met Lisa Williams when we were doing Love Loud through our church, and we would go out and do projects for her yearly there at her home. I had no idea that we actually had a residential treatment facility here in Cherokee that supported victims of commercial sexual exploitation that were children. When we met Lisa, she's an amazing human who has just dedicated her life to serving these children. Well, one story that she told us right when we first met her was how hard it is for these girls when they first come into her care. They don't want her help. They don't want to be there. They don't consider themselves victims. They don't want to be held down. And surprisingly enough, even though they have been rescued and they are safe and they're getting food and they're getting treatment and they're getting education, they're getting each and everything that they've been missing out on, there really is a strong desire at first for these girls to run away and to go back into the life. And at first, she's telling us this, and I was like, gosh, that doesn't really, how do you explain that? But when you hear Lisa and you hear the stories that she has to tell from the victims that she's talked to, you quickly understand that for most of these people, for most of these children, that's the only lifestyle that they've ever known. And even though they were being harmed, they want to go back and to be with what their normal was. This next clip is an interview with a defendant. This is a case that actually, my Holly Springs people probably remember, which was Solomon Mustafa and Shannon Wallace. These are two individuals who came into Cherokee County and a victim in Holly Springs. Actually, to give you just a little bit of the backstory, the victim was 14 years old, and she had met Solomon Mustafa over the internet. She'd been communicating with him through Craigslist and I believe Backpage.com, just two sites that are commonly used for prostitution and illicit sexual encounters. And Mr. Mustafa started texting with this child. He knew how old she was. He's asking her basically to come run away with him, promising her that life was going to be good, that he would buy her what she needs, knows that her and her parents aren't getting along. Basically, I'll be your daddy. Just come with me, come run away with me. The 14-year-old child, using a 14-year-old brain, agreed to meet him. Mr. Mustafa and Miss Wallace came to Cherokee County. They told the child how to sneak out of her house and where to meet him, and she did. When she got in the car with him, she quickly changed her mind and wanted to leave. However, they wouldn't let her. Mr. Mustafa was driving, Miss Wallace was in the front seat, and wouldn't let the child out. At some point in time during the drive, she ended up getting out of the car and going and basically asking for help. Well, in the meantime, her parents had figured out that she had snuck out, and they called law enforcement, and Holly Springs did an excellent job in this particular case of getting to the bottom of exactly what happened. As it turns out, Mr. Mustafa had, I believe, ended up being caught with 5 other females that he had trafficked in that were in Alabama, that he had transported from Georgia to Alabama. When those girls were rescued, they had all kind of stories about what had happened to them and how violent Mustafa had been after promising them originally how grand life was going to be. Mustafa was prosecuted federally, as was Miss Wallace, and I know I'm going ahead of myself a couple of slides, but I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. He was prosecuted and was sentenced to life, and Miss Wallace was sentenced to 5 years in prison. And this story that was done by CNN, I believe Jada Pinkett Smith, I'm not sure how she says her name, but she narrated this story, and in the story, she talked to all kind of people. She talked to victims, to defendants, to prosecutors, to law enforcement, and this was an excellent video to watch. It's kind of long, the entire story is, but it was a series called Children for Sale. So I would highly encourage you, if you're interested, you can Google it and watch the entire video on YouTube. But this is just a little excerpt in reference to the Cherokee County case, if it will play.
Workers come in all descriptions, all ages, backgrounds, ethnicities, and they're not all men.
Truth be told, she was actually involved in recruitment of these groups.
Kennedy is talking about this woman. We'll call her Katrina. She served 4 years in federal prison for trafficking other women. Katrina's path started with selling herself.
I was dancing at a couple different strip clubs, and different men would approach me with different offers, and eventually I just took one of the offers, and over time just became numb and just continued to offer services.
When did that begin for you? How old were you?
17.
You were 17 years old. When did you actually get involved in trafficking other women?
I was about 21.
Okay.
A few years later, I ended up meeting a guy who was supposed to provide driving services.
Got it.
And it just ended up evolving from there.
Evolving into big money for Katrina and her partner, Solomon Mustafa. Tell me the amount of women that were working with you guys at once.
Over the course of the time that I was working with him, I would say about 40.
40 women? How much money would you make a day?
I think it would depend on how many females was working. With one, maybe 2,000.
So if you had several women working at one time, you could make what? Tell me.
3 and 5.
$3,000 and $5,000. $5,000 in a single night. It's hard to imagine. But it's in line with a Justice Department study which found the average trafficker in Atlanta makes $32,000 a week. I'm trying to understand. But when I asked Katrina about one particularly brutal incident, she is evasive about the details.
Something went wrong.
Do you remember what went wrong?
I want to say something, maybe she said something or gave him a implication that she wasn't going to give out her money or something.
The woman testified that Katrina and Mustafa struck her in the face, locked her in the closet, and then took her to Alabama.
She was going to take them to Alabama and with no intentions of working, just intentions of, I guess, getting rid of her.
You said no intentions of working, just intentions of getting rid of her? She was left alive but abandoned, helpless, like so many victims of trafficking. What would you tell young women right now? What could they do to protect themselves?
Just not put themselves out there like that. Even something so simple as dancing at a club, as you think it's so simple. It's a breeding ground and it's very tempting. I just wish I could have did something different. I wish I would have made different choices.
That was Shannon Wallace, the defendant that we talked about, taking the 14-year-old child from here in Cherokee County, right here in Holly Springs. But unfortunately, it's not just strangers who pick up children and do vile things with children. Parents. This is a case from Central Georgia, where I was raised, where the parents were involved in selling their children to make their car payments. As much as we as humans want to believe that evil isn't out there, it absolutely is. Buyers, individuals, sometimes called Johns, clients, Marks, Ricks, but fortunately for us in Georgia, our law now makes these individuals simply called traffickers, because the law actually now allows for buyers to be treated harshly just as the pimps. And if you think about it, how is it that you end something like human trafficking? How is it that you cut the head off of that monster? Well, you have to take away the demand. And the only way to take away the demand on something like this is to prosecute the buyers as harshly as you prosecute the sellers. Myths surrounding buyers. Again, common misconceptions that we hear in the judicial system with respect to individuals who buy sex with children and other females. That only lonely single men buy sex, that only men buy sex, period. That only men from Metro Atlanta buy sex, or only sexual predators buy sex. The facts are, usually it is men who are in committed relationships that are purchasing sex with both children and adults. Even though the majority of the buyers are male, buyers can be female as well. There was a study that was done by the Shapiro Group in 2010, and it was a study that actually looked at surveys that people had completed. There's a lot of facts about that particular study. It was a small sampling, but what they ended up doing is having an advertisement through, I believe, Backpage, where people thought they were looking to purchase sex. They called into the number, and when they called in and asked several questions, part of the survey basically was how many of the people hung up when they found out that the person was a child. That, oh, well, she says she's 18, but we're not sure. Then they kept continuing to talk and got to a point in the study where they said, well, she says she's 18, but she's definitely not. And they looked at where these individuals were, what part of Georgia they came from, their demographics, and then also how far they actually went in communicating, and how far they went even after they knew the person they were communicating about was a child. In this particular study, and based on the other research that's been done, most of the individuals were from the suburban areas, the area outside of 285 is where the buyers are coming from. That's right here in Cherokee County. It's of no surprise now that we have the internet, which can be really great. You can get any information that you want or need at the touch of your fingertips. But with that comes along the ability to get, with just the stroke of a few keys, children by purchasing them. Another myth is that only sexual predators buy sex. Again, according to this study, approximately 23% of Georgia men have purchased sex with females. 23% of the male population in Georgia. That is alarming. Another thing that has been shown, and the Department of Justice gave the statistics that Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, is one of the top 14 cities in the nation for sexually trafficked children. Why? A question that we all ask. Why is Atlanta so high why is it considered a hub? First and foremost, believe it's not going to be surprising that one of the main reasons is the large adult entertainment industry that we have here in Atlanta. The number of motels that are near these particular adult entertainment spots, the escort service call centers, the fact that we have the largest and busiest airport makes Atlanta particularly vulnerable for being a hub. Also, the music industry, now as we continue to go forward with the movie industry coming to Georgia, the largest concentration of colleges and universities in the southern United States, the dense population, the high tourism are all reasons why Atlanta is in the top 14 of hubs of sexually trafficked individuals. But it isn't just an Atlanta problem. As you can see, with respect to looking at the buyers, this is a problem that really is focused on outside of the metro Atlanta area. So who are these buyers? When you look at pictures and you look at their titles, what you will see is that these buyers are from some of the most trusted professions that we have around. Police officers, CEO executives, preachers, youth counselors, Disney workers, airline pilots, correctional officers, soldiers. And these were just a few that I picked from just Googling and looking at sting operations that have occurred in Georgia, and you look at the people who are arrested and what their profession is. So how is it that these buyings occur? Of course, you do still have, you can drive on the streets and find somebody standing on the corner. However, that's not the most common ways that trafficking is occurring. It's occurring on the internet, and you don't even have to go to the dark web. You really just look at Backpage, Craigslist, other common mediums for buying and selling other property, just buying and selling a table. You can find this anywhere you look, which again is why it's so important for parents and guardians and teachers and anybody who deals with children to be hypervigilant about monitoring what they're doing on the internet. As I stated before, when you look at what it is that we can do as a community to help end human trafficking, from the justice system is of course what I look to first and foremost, and in looking at what has helped and what will help is the system will collapse if you stop the demand. In the way that the justice system, the Georgia Assembly has tried to make the laws as harsh as they are today, and to include buyers in there and treat them just like you would a seller, is making these harsh laws and then enforcing those laws. One of the biggest things that you have to remember, though, is there are so many misconceptions surrounding this particular area of law that it's important to spend time educating not just our jurors, which each and every one of you are, but also our law enforcement, and making sure that our law enforcement have the resources and the tools that they need, not only to identify these individuals when they're on the streets, but also that they're trained in properly making sure that they treat them just as they are and for what they are, and that's victims. When we as a community look at the problem and realize and recognize that these individuals who are involved are in fact victims, and punish the individuals who are selling and buying them, then we will make great strides in ending and collapsing the system. I told you a little about Lisa Williams, and she has moved her home. It's no longer in Cherokee County. She has one of her organizations now. They're focusing more on older victims, but she's now in downtown Atlanta and is helping to get victims into college and really kind of following those individuals that she helped at an early age through life. But this is a video when she participated in the CNN story that she made that really goes to what each and every one of us can do to help end this epidemic.
Lisa Williams.
This home that is showing it was the house here in Cherokee.
And we make them believe it. And if they can't believe it, Jada, we believe it for them until they're able to latch on to it. I got that.
Since graduating from Living Water for Girls, Sasha Ray's life hasn't been perfect.
There you go.
But she's working hard on her future. She now has a job and...
You graduated from high school? I got my GED. Nice. How'd you feel about accomplishing that? The first person I called was Miss Lisa. I was like, oh my gosh, I guess what? I graduated. And she was like, yes.
And Sasha Ray knows she will have Lisa Williams behind her all the way.
You said when you met Miss Lisa, you felt a love that felt better than that you felt from your exploiter. What makes Miss Lisa's love better?
Just her, when you walk into a room, you'll just feel, you can be mad, just mad to the world. When you walk into a room, she just brightens because her smile. She's, hey beautiful, just those words, really those words. Hey beautiful, that just makes him dead to the situation.
And just as those first words she wrote down in a letter brought Miss Lisa into her life,
Something for you.
Sasha Ray now has another message she'd like to deliver.
Dear Miss Lisa, since you've been in my life, things haven't been the same. Yes, I'm not going to lie. I still struggle. But I can say I'm stronger, I'm wiser. And I can honestly say I do love myself. And I have hope for myself.
Love and hope. Two things everyone needs, wants, and deserves.
I love you too.
That was a good hug.
I love you, Jennifer. I really need this hug.
Johns, tricks, pimps, the words are all wrong. People who are exploiting teenage boys and girls aren't pimps. They're human traffickers. And the people who are having sex with children aren't Johns or tricks. They are child rapists, pedophiles. So we should call them what they are. So you ask, what can you do? Well, you can talk to your kids about human trafficking. And if you need more information, go to cnn.com/freedom.
The last slide just includes for more information. Honestly, to find information out about human trafficking in Georgia, really all you have to do is to Google. You just anything you really want to know, statistics, videos. There is a good book. The name of it is Invading the Darkness. I believe Linda Smith is the author, and I believe she was a U.S. representative that has focused her efforts on combating human trafficking. I read, about 40 or 50 pages of it this weekend, and it's an excellent book that's got a lot of history in it as far as the procedures of how the law has come about, both the federal law and then some of the state laws. But she does a good job at talking to victims and putting individual stories in the book. But that's a good book to look at too. Really, honestly, the amount of videos and movies and information that's out there today, quickly available is excellent. It just goes to show how far we've come in trying to get out the word to the communities as to what the problem is and what can be done and what each and every individual can do. You don't have to be the district attorney or a law enforcement officer or a teacher. Really, you can be anybody that can do small things and get involved and help combat the problem. So that is all of the information. As I said, I could probably talk about this for 5 more hours, but I'm not going to do that. But if anybody has any questions, or I'm not sure how I'm doing on time.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes if anybody has any questions.
I'm scared to call on you. I can only say that because you're my father.
Well, probably about 4 years ago, Councilman Canton, former councilman, had a screening of a movie at the theater, and he invited a congressman. The congressman was in D.C., so I went in his place. And if I hadn't been sitting beside a councilman about halfway through that movie, I would have probably left. It just made you so uncomfortable because it's not as similar to what happened here. Because this is a tricky thing. It was the trickiness of it. Okay, let's say a girl was in middle school, but she thought she was pretty as any girl in high school. And then this high school boy started paying her attention and said, well, there's going to be a party over in so-and-so's house. And her parents said, no, you can't go. So she snuck out and went. Well, this guy, let's see, I'm trying to remember the steps of this. This guy, there were a couple 19-year-old, there was a couple that were selling this 16-year-old kid drugs or giving them to him if he would bring some dates to these parties. Okay, this couple, 19-year-old couple, there was a 35-year-old man that was paying them, basically put them in a house and a car and whatever else to recruit these girls. So it was that little 12-year-old thought she was going to meet that 16-year-old at a neighborhood party, and ended up that night she was taken out of town by a 35-year-old. It was just all a real setup, and it wasn't. These were regular folks. It wasn't like what you're talking about, a runaway, a multiple runaway or something. This is just some little kid that decided, daggone it, she needed to go to that party. And because this guy had been paying her a lot of attention, and it was like she went in one room and 15 minutes later she was in a car going down the road drugged. And so it just, I mean, the whole movie just made you want to, jump up and hit somebody. So.
Well, and to that point, it's not just a movie, it is real life, and it's happening here.
Yeah.
And we actually had 2 kids that were living in a group home here in Cherokee County that did the exact same thing, in that they snuck away from the high school, went across the street to Brewster's, thought they were going to go with some young men to smoke marijuana and have a party, and ended up getting given to a human trafficker out of DeKalb County. That case was prosecuted by DeKalb County, and those individuals are serving a significant amount of time. But that, again, is happening in Cherokee County.
I wasn't clear about that. This was a documentary.
Yeah.
This was a movie about something, and I want to say the guy jumped up on stage, and he was from California, and it happened to his sister. His sister was kidnapped, and they looked for her for months and months. And so he made the movie to try to keep other people from being, so it wasn't like a Hollywood.
I think that for most people, when they see something on the big screen, you have a natural tendency to disassociate that from reality, and it's not. I mean, you asked Ms. Pat how prevalent is it? It's really hard to say. I mean, fortunately, we're not prosecuting human trafficking every day here in Cherokee County. However, it really is hard to say how truly prevalent it is, because you have to realize that we aren't prosecuting a lot of people. People aren't necessarily getting caught. if you have buyers here and the children are coming or the individuals are coming here, it takes an active step, law enforcement catching them and them getting charged before we're actually able to prosecute them. The case that I was referring to earlier about that the last defendant pled guilty to today, and that was a situation that was brought to law enforcement's attention about a house that really was at first a nuisance. And law enforcement ended up investigating, and our multi-agency narcotics squad ended up being the one that wrote the investigation and arresting, I believe 5 total people were arrested, but it was a house of prostitution. We were not able to make a human trafficking charge under 16546, but we were able to be creative and charge the individuals with racketeering, with the underlying offenses being pimping and pandering and maintaining a house of prostitution, and getting significant prison sentences on those individuals. That one was a taxi driver, one was the house boss, one was the cook who helped when the house boss was gone, and then another was a buyer. But that took law enforcement doing undercover operations and using a confidential informant before it was actually, the ring was busted. And then we know that we just basically got the tip of the iceberg there.
Okay, 2-part question. One, how many of these traffickers actually end up serving sentences? Do you have any tracking data on that? And number 2 is how often are they pleading and getting lesser sentences for these type of issues?
Okay, I can't really answer that, to be honest with you. I can say that the few cases that I'm familiar with that we've talked about here in Mustafa and Shannon Wallace, they're actually serving, Mr. Mustafa serving a mandatory life sentence. So he's not getting out. Most of the cases that I'm familiar with from really Metro Atlanta, a couple of things. Metro Atlanta, Fulton County, and DeKalb County were really kind of way ahead of the curve in addressing human trafficking and taking the statute and going full force with prosecuting those cases. They have units set up within their office, the DA's office, that all they do are handle human trafficking cases. They have units within their law enforcement that all they do is handle those types of cases. When all you do is handle a specific type of case, it's really a lot easier to get trained and focused on how to prosecute those cases. Same thing with law enforcement. As Chief can tell you, when you are a small unit and you have to work all types of crimes, it's harder to be specialized and focused on a particular area of law. But the bigger the unit is and the more you have the ability to train people and focus a handful of officers on combating that particular crime, the easier it is to find these cases, put a good solid case together, and then give it to the prosecutor for them to prosecute. I can't remember your question though. Data, you asked for data.
Yeah.
In Georgia, I can say that the sexual servitude, the human trafficking law, is a mandatory sentence that can't be suspended, probated, or deferred. So much like when you get convicted of aggravated child molestation, aggravated sexual battery, rape, the crimes that would also go along with a child that is a victim in this type of case, they are all served full sentences. If you get a life, serve 25, you serve 25 to the door. So as these crimes, as they are investigated and prosecuted under that human trafficking statute, I think what you will find is people are going to be most likely going to trial a lot more because you really don't have much to lose if the mandatory minimum sentence is 25 years in prison or even 10 years in prison without probation. But we do have people who plead to it just because they're looking at so many different counts.
2 questions, 2 points. Does Cherokee County have a dedicated task force for this? Second question, does Cherokee County work with the school system and education of their students regarding this?
Okay, first question, does Cherokee County have a dedicated task force? Not today. unless, of course, the chairman over here wants to give us a dedicated unit. We do not in the DA's office have a dedicated unit. We really don't have a specialty unit in Cherokee in the DA's office really at all, with the exception of our white collar division and domestic violence division. Since that happens to be my specialty, we have a lot of people who now specialize in prosecuting crimes against women and children, but not specifically with respect to human trafficking. We are law enforcement, and we don't have dedicated units to just human trafficking, but what we do have is the Sheriff's Department has an Internet Crimes Against Children unit that basically would be the unit that is investigating and focusing on the internet-based, the social media part of that. But I am a part of a statewide human trafficking task force through the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, and as a part of that task force, one of our jobs on my specific work group is to develop training materials and to present that across the state. I hope that that particular training, and it's my portion of it is geared towards law enforcement, judges, prosecutors. My hope is that we will do it in Cherokee County either this year or next year. It's been held across the state already, and we've participated in developing. In fact, some of what you saw was my portion of the bigger training that we did. But that task force is made up of not just law enforcement. There are therapeutic portions to that task force. I know our Rotary group, Rotary Club of Canton, an individual that is on that task force with me is in Rotary, not in Canton, but he does a lot of speaking engagements. So there's community organizations that are involved in that as well. Something that I believe Governor Dill started. I may be wrong about who actually started it, but I know that's when I got involved in it, was under Governor Dill. So I think that was both your questions, or what was the
second question was, is there any education through the school system correlated with?
Okay, so we don't have a training per se with the school system on human trafficking, but we do provide a lot of training both through the PTAs in Cherokee County with internet crimes that both law enforcement, Sheriff's Department, and our office have participated with. And then the DA's office does training. It's not, again, geared just towards human trafficking, but we do a lot of training within school systems. You look confused for me.
I'm specifically saying, are you educating our children? Is somebody out there educating our children what to be aware of, what to stay away from?
Yeah, no. Generally, we are educating the children on the harms of social media and things to look out for. We are not specifically talking about human trafficking. It's more broad. It's more, you have to be careful with who you talk to and what you do on social media. And it also incorporates the traveling with you and putting things on social media and how that follows you for the rest of your life. And we also hit on people who are defendants in the system because of things they do with respect to not just the internet, but also sex-related crimes too.
We do have a curriculum that builds as the children move up in grades, because of course you don't want to give a kindergarten to the same grade. You would give a middle student stuff, but we do have a curriculum for as far as social media and touch and touch with us. Common social media as well.
Yeah, during the Super Bowl, there was a lot of hype about it, and there was numbers everywhere. And I remember the case where the girl was at a gas station, went to someone, there was a number, she called and got help for this young lady. Do we have that in our bathroom, in our public bathrooms here? I mean, I haven't seen it, so I'm wondering, have we started that here so that people have access to the number to
Yeah, certain organizations are required to have it. I can tell you in the Justice Center, I today went in the bathroom and there's a posting that's in the bathroom. I'm not sure about here. You may want to look. Typically, it's in the stalls. Like they have stickers that they put on the toilet paper dispensers, and you know.
Well, I know like at the hospitals and stuff like that they do. I'm just thinking that, you know, especially at our schools and stuff, that might be where if a young lady finds herself in a situation, that she would have access to that too.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
There's legislation.
Yes.
This session that's between the city that needs to be mandatory and all schools to be posted.
The signs, the warrant, the help and hotlines. Did you hear that? There was legislation pending this year in Georgia to mandate postings with the hotline and information about what to do if you're victimized. I thought I saw
Suggested to the school board members, the Safe School app, that being a resource for students as well as parents to report. Is that part that goes directly to our police department?
Safe Schools app is a wonderful resource. We do have a lot of kids that actually report things that they can't see on that, that are being investigated by our police department. You know, we're one of only 5 counties in the state that have our own police departments. And we have 2 police officers who are dedicated to just children issues on that, which they've been trained in how to identify, how to question, and all that sort of thing. Children that are in crisis. But yeah, the Safe Schools Act is a great place. Anybody can report on it.
pretty much anything can be recorded on that Safe Schools app.
Yes.
And law enforcement actually do look into it. I mean, I know I receive calls at night about they receive this information through Safe Schools, so they take it very seriously, thankfully. Any other questions? Sorry to depress you tonight. It's very much a heavy topic. I often forget, because I do this for a living, that not everybody is used to seeing and hearing what I see and hear on a daily basis. So I apologize. I think you have one more question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you know, you mentioned like there's 280 some cases that were through the hotline. How much is that, like 1% of all the cases? It's mostly police officers being observant and trained professionals that find the most cases to bring charges? As
far as the hotline goes, the number that I gave you, I don't know what percentage that is of the real. I can just say that that's a gross underreporting of the total number. But for that particular hotline, that was mostly the community and victims and parents that are family members that were reporting, not necessarily the police officers.
I was asking, that percent of that 280, if that's the total number, that's kind of low. I'm saying, does police and law enforcement do 2,000 over that same period of time, or 10,000, or you know?
I don't have the exact numbers for you, but yeah, I would say that the statistics that I have from the Department of Justice and from other resources that are law enforcement related are more like 300,000 cases a year. So it's nowhere near the 200, and that 287 again was for a 6-month period that were people calling into a hotline of basically giving tips, not cases that were even really given to law enforcement to prosecute. I would say, I don't have an exact number, but I would say that the number of actual cases that are being reported and investigated and prosecuted even here in Georgia are going to greatly exceed that 200 mark.
Thank you for coming.
You were so welcome.